everyone, it's Alice, and today it's time to wrap up and review the books I read in September. So this is probably gonna be a shorter video because September was not a great reading month for me. I don't know what it is, but I'm just feeling a little bit slumpy. I just don't really feel like reading, and I've been like super busy these days and really tired, so I think that has had something to do with it. And then I don't know what happened, but I haven't been reading a lot. I did manage to finish 3 books though, which I feel like is pretty alright, so we're just gonna talk about those. The first book that I finished was The Queen's Gambit by Walter Tevis. This is a sort of modern classic. It's historical fiction, I guess, and it starts off in the 1950s when we meet Beth, who is sent to an orphanage at the age of 8. And while she's there, she discovers 2 ways of sort of escaping her life. She learns how to play chess, and she takes these green little pills that the orphanage gives all of the children to keep them subdued. It becomes apparent though that Beth has an amazing talent for chess, and she's able to forge a new life for herself because of it, but she also struggles with addiction. I read this book because I wanted to watch the show, but I also wanted to read the book first, so I did, and although I did enjoy this, I didn't love it. My favorite thing about this book is definitely the main character. Like, I just loved reading about her and her life and her wins and fails and struggles. And this is in big parts a sort of coming of age story, and I generally really like those stories, especially when we're following these types of characters. And I felt like I was really rooting for Beth from the very beginning, and I was very intrigued to see where she would end up. I also really like the time period this is set in and all the different settings that we get to see, and I thought that the writing was good, even though I didn't think it was like particularly beautiful or anything. I do think this book starts off stronger than it finishes. I felt like towards the end we sort of got caught up in pages and pages of just like chess games and chess play, and I felt like those parts should have been like filled with tension, but it just didn't work for me. Like, those parts felt very dull and boring, and it was a slog to get through. And I don't know what happened, because in the beginning of the book I really enjoyed all of the chess parts, but towards the end it just lost me a little bit, and I feel like maybe all of the chess stuff could have been written a little bit differently so that it was a little bit more engaging. There are also some parts like the romantic bits in here that I felt absolutely no connection to, and then there's something that happens in the beginning of the book that's really disturbing, that is just like never mentioned again, and nothing ever comes of it, which if you've read the book you'll know what that is. It's not actually in the show, but it is in the book, and I felt like the fact that that just happens and then it just disappears was very odd. Overall though, I am glad that I read this because it was very interesting to compare to the show, which I actually ended up preferring over the book, which is usually not the case, and I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. The second book that I finished was The King of Crows by Libba Bray. This is a historical fiction fantasy YA book, and it's the 4th book in the Diviners series, and in here we once again return to 1920s New York, and we meet the Diviners, who are a group of young people with supernatural abilities, and in this book they face up against their biggest enemy yet. I have thoroughly enjoyed reading the series, and it is always a little bit bittersweet to like finish the final book in a series that you really like, but I'm glad I finally got around to reading this, and now I've finished the whole series. It was especially wonderful to revisit the characters in here and see all of them come together in this book, and I just love the setting of these books and how the time period is like brought to life. Like, I get really sucked into these books. I also really enjoy the bad guys in all of these books. I feel like they're always like so creepy and like properly scary. I did find this to drag a little bit more than I remember any of the other books doing. Like, I felt like it started off really well, and then we get to this huge chunk in the middle where nothing really happens, and then we get to the end and things sort of pick back up. I also feel like out of the 4 books, this is the one that's the most predictable. Like, I could tell pretty early on where the story was going. That being said, my enjoyment factor for these books are always like really high, which is one of the reasons I like this series so much. This fourth one might be my least favorite out of the four, but I did still really enjoy it. It was entertaining for the most part, and I really did love revisiting the characters, and I love how dark these books get, and I love all of the supernatural stuff, so I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. The last book that I finished was The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, and this is a classic science fiction book, and it's about this lone survivor of a ship lost at sea who ends up at this island in the Pacific where this brilliant scientist is living and doing experiments that have seen him shunned from the civilized world, which is why he's on this island. And he is also the reason why this island has a lot of interesting inhabitants. I have had this book for ages, and it's one of those stories that I was vaguely familiar with before I went in, but I was actually surprised by how much I enjoyed this. This was a very quick read, it's quite short, and it's filled with all kinds of weird stuff. I was very intrigued to like find out what was going on the island, and it was very interesting to see the protagonist get there and like try to make sense of everything that was going on around him and everything that he was hearing and seeing. I also really enjoyed the whole like mad scientist thing that's going on in this book, and I think that the story poses a lot of interesting questions, and it makes you think about a lot of things, like what happens when we take science too far and the consequences of it, how far one should go to try to do something, the cost of knowledge, and the sort of similarities and differences between man and animal. I quite enjoy Wells's writing as well, and there were parts in here that I found to be very exciting. Now, I do think this is probably less shocking nowadays than it would have been back when it was first published, and I do think that the science in here doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, and it is a little bit over the top in a way, but I still really liked it because of what it made me think about. I'm really glad that I read this. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and it reminds me that I really need to read more of Wells's work, so if any of you have any recommendations for what to read next, I would love to know. I have read The War of the Worlds, which I very much enjoyed, so anything other than that and this, if you have any recommendations, let me know. So those were all the books that I finished, but I thought since I only had 3 books to talk about today, I would also tell you about the book that I'm currently in the middle of. I am reading Miss Benson's Beetle by Rachel Joyce, and I think exactly like halfway through, and I am loving this book. It's so enjoyable. I picked this up thinking it was going to be the perfect story for me, but now that I've started reading it, it's actually like better than I thought it was going to be. It's set in 1950, and we follow this school teacher who decides to like leave her life behind and go in search of this beetle that she has dreamed about finding her whole life. And she brings an assistant with her who she doesn't know, and she's like amazing but also low-key kind of shady. And then there's someone following them, and they're on the other side of the world, and it's a whole thing, and I am loving this book. It's so enjoyable, and it has more layers to it than I thought it was going to have. You'll have to wait a while for my final review, but right now this is sitting at like a 4 or a 5 star rating for me, which is very good. Anyways, those are all the books that I had to talk about today, and I'm hoping that October will be a better reading month for me, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I would love to know what you all have been reading lately, and as usual, links to my Patreon and other social media will be in the description if you're interested, and I will see you soon. Bye!